Hello and welcome to DigFin VOX, Voices in Digital Finance. I'm your host, James DiBiasio. If you like what we're doing at DigFin VOX, subscribe, share, just give us a simple like. It all helps us bring more traffic to the site. Probably one of the biggest topics in fintech is Regtech, because regulation cuts to the heart of everything that financial institutions are about. I spoke with Ashish Rai, Group Managing Director for Capital Markets for Asia, Middle East and Africa at FIS, about big trends for banks, asset managers, and insurance companies, new technologies, new regulation, and maybe some old problems. Ashish Rai, welcome to DigFin VOX. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
My pleasure. So you are overseeing capital markets work at FIS across Asia and the Middle East, so very big job. What are the biggest trends right now when it comes to risk management and regulatory issues in capital markets?
We see a few core underlying trends, right? If I was to sort of simplify it down, number one, the volume of regulation coming through, right? And this is across most of the players. So one is, post-financial crisis, you had this big chunk of regulation coming in, all for very good reasons. You're talking Basel III Accord, do you have the right quality of assets on your balance sheet? And if you don't, then do you have capital to offset the risky assets, right? There is a lot of new regulation coming in to reflect the increased amount of digitalization, the new businesses that have come in, crypto, ESG, a lot of things which regulators need to reflect on and find whether there is systemic risk. So there is a lot more ask from the regulators, right? So that sort of is the volume is one. The second is the level of scrutiny that the regulators need to do, right? So if you see you demand a much higher volume of data, the regulators need it's not just the volume, it's the frequency at which you need it, it's the granularity of the data, right? So that again has, I think, dramatically changed. That's probably number two. And a third vector is the fragmentation across the regulatory space, right? And this is especially for institutions that are multi-jurisdictional. So then you've got this complex interwoven web, whether you're looking at FRTB, you're looking at LIBOR transition, looking at ESG, looking at, any of the regulations coming in, and then you're sort of mapping that to the jurisdiction you are in. I think that makes it quite complicated, right? So I would say these three probably underlying almost everything.
I noticed FIS put out an annual or regular readiness report. How ready are our capital market institutions for this stuff? And I noticed that in Asia, at least, you broke down different things for, Singapore had one list of priorities, Hong Kong had a different list. Why are these priorities different? What makes it that what's going on in two global financial centers are different?
Yeah, so no, it's a good question. So we don't necessarily start with a view that they're different. I think we just like taking a market by market understanding of where is it that our clients are focusing on in terms of transforming their tech, transforming their operations, right? And I think largely the trend around reg reporting, the trend around movement to new technologies, movement to cloud, I think that's more or less the same. But then there are market-specific differences that you very clearly see, right? So, for example, on the risk management side, if you see, it's a major focus for sell-side institutions, both in Singapore as well as Hong Kong. There's no difference, right? But when you look at the buy-side players in Singapore, we saw that a very large number had ESG reporting, for example, as their priority, right? And we do expect this to sort of go worldwide, right? As it becomes more and more of a focus area, it's a big trend. But you see that in Singapore. So I think that probably is reflective of where the regulatory environment is and where the players are in terms of what they're focusing on. But that's probably looking out 12 months.
What are the priorities right now? So when I talk to banks or fintechs, it often seems the real priority is grab the real estate in the digital space. So a lot of front end stuff, make payments, instant or whatever it is that they're offering. And yet there isn't always the same commensurate investment or thought that goes into the operations in the back end. I mean, I'm making a gross, generalization here, but obviously compliance requirements by regulation have forced banks to invest a lot in a variety of compliance functions and cyber threat mitigation. But just making the stuff work, how well do you see that going? Are we still getting the same level of competence on the back end that we are seeing on the front end?
Yeah, so I think the competence on the front end or the investment on the front end also probably varies, but you're right. I mean, there is almost a secular trend in the increase in digital transactions, and that's probably frankly got to do with probably pandemic has accelerated the trend. You can argue the number of years it's accelerated by, but it's accelerated, and I think it's partly the consumer demand, right? So yes, people are reacting to it. I think on the compliance side, you look at the back end. I do see there is the typical approach of you got a new change, you throw people at it. I think people have realized that is less and less effective. So we do need to use technology to otherwise the economic cost of really the burden of compliance is just too high, right? And then you see there is a lot more interest in using AI, for example, right? We've got a few offerings we came out with, and you see, okay, for example, AML. We launched an AML compliance hub with some of our partners, and we're looking at it. It's a very manual job, despite some technology already existing there, right? And how do you really aggregate all the information across and reduce the number of false positives, for example, to really reduce the manual labor, right? And we do see the more forward-looking institutions moving towards it. I think there is a lot more interest in not just throwing people at the problem and actually using tech.
What do you see as the strengths? Let's talk about the strengths first, the positives that Regtech in general is bringing to this space. What's Regtech proven itself to be really good at? And then we can talk a little bit about where it needs to catch up.
What is Regtech really good at? I think for institutions which are ready, the taking care of the reporting burden, being able to get the right level of calculations in place, the risk calculations especially, I think there is a level of maturity around that, right? I think what probably increases is even the complexity of the risk calculation, even the accounting changes that are coming in, that sort of the burden increases more and more, right? So are you ready for the burden which is coming? Even in those spaces, I think is probably a problem, right? But I think there is a level of maturity around risk management. There is a level of maturity around reg reporting. There is a level of maturity given what the ask used to be, right? And then the question is, where are you going from there?
Sometimes it feels like we're not getting all what AI has promised or what people thought it could deliver. So, what are some of the shortfalls, and are these temporary and they're just going to get better with more data and experience, or are there some substantial things that we're finding that there's not like a magic bullet that technology can bring?
Yeah, no, so look, people said the same thing about automation as well, right? I mean, you don't get what was promised. But the thing is this: when you look at AI, I think it's probably useful to look at some secular trends, right? That are underlying this. One is data, clearly, right? I think there's an explosion of data, and there is more and more of it, and our ability to consume it, spew it out is a lot more. And I think pandemic has sort of accelerated that manifold. So I think that's one, right? I mean, the explosion of data, the availability of it, etc. I think the second major thing to look at is the compute itself, right? I think compute, the availability of it, compute on demand through cloud services everywhere else, I think that's also dramatically changed the equation in the last couple of years in terms of how much compute do you have available. Because at the end of the day, AI is if you've got a lot of compute working on it, that changes the equation versus what was available to you. So that's second, right? And the third is the maturity of the sort of algorithmic procedures, the AI learning models itself. I think the neural nets, deep learning, I think there's a lot more maturity around it, and the cost of training AI is dramatically reducing every year, right? So some say it's like 65% reduction every year, right? And the effectiveness keeps increasing every year, right? So if you look at these three things sort of together, and then you say, yes, this is where it is, but I think the effectiveness level increases a lot more as you go forward with the data, with the compute, with the maturity of the AI setup.
What then will you think will be the next couple of years? Where will some of the big gains be? What will be some of the priorities that banks and asset managers will be placing on this technology?
Yeah, so look, I think you referenced the readiness survey, and one of the big things we found, across centers like Singapore, Hong Kong, is risk management clearly, and compliance. More than a third of the respondents put that as the number one operational challenge and tech challenge for them to solve, right? So I do believe there is going to be a lot more focus, or there already is a lot more focus on the risk and compliance space. Within the usage of AI as well, we saw a lot more focus on using AI for compliance purposes, and we put out a couple of offerings. I was talking about the AML one. We also launched a communication sort of compliance manager, and I see again a lot more interest in it. So I think we see that both in terms of the market data points, as well as what we saw from readiness survey in terms of what the response is saying is their priority.
When we talk about risk management, that's a very broad concept right there. What within risk management do you think will be where certainly you will be focusing a lot of your work, and where you see banks or buy sides focusing more of theirs?
It's a very, very wide area, but I would say one focus clearly is the core regulations coming through across sectors, and what do we do about it. I think the second clear area is, where do we actually embed machine learning, embed AI to get an edge out of it. The third major priority overall for us, I think, is how do you really enable, Jim, end-to-end sort of frictionless data across the enterprise, right? So once you get there, and then you say, okay, how does that impact risk management for an enterprise? I think that's pretty spectacular, right?
That end-to-end, getting that data to move across the organization like that. I mean, in many ways, that's what digital transformation really is all about, right? You're taking a bank or some other institution. The products are these sort of legally defined silos. They're legal contracts, basically, whether it's securities or a loan or something. And how you get that data to be shared, whether it's for a front office function like selling a personalized offer, but also for being able to understand, where's your liquidity, where's your credit risk, all the other factors that go into protecting the organization. So how far along are we? From your perspective, how far along are we with this digital transformation? Are you hopeful that many institutions, even the very biggest ones, are getting closer and closer to really being able to have that data sharing in a secure way?
So are we really well progressed on it? I think there is advanced thinking in a few institutions that we see across. Is it all pervasive? No. And a lot of the industry, if you see, I think you got a lot of legacy systems in there. So when you talk of products and you say, okay, there are product silos, you see behind each of those product silos, there is a legacy system sitting behind, which is from quite far back, right? Do you have a uniform architecture across? You probably don't, right? But I think there are institutions which are getting more advanced. I fundamentally believe the industry, so the financial industry in general has, in a lot of extent, especially banking, you see on the retail side, very relationship centered. I think you move away from being relationship centered to a lot more data centered, right? And what also sort of probably pushes the case a little bit more is all the new fintechs, tech fins, whatever you call them. A lot of organizations who probably are not a part of the regulate, not probably as tightly regulated as banks, but in the digital credit space, wherever else, who come in probably looking to use data edge as a way to compete, right? Not so much the relationship edge. So you're probably coming in new, you don't have that client relationship as your competitive advantage. So now you've got a set of competitors who really are trying to use the data edge. So there is always this pressure to react to it. I think a lot of legacy architecture doesn't help it, James, but there is a clear movement towards really getting to that end-to-end view of the enterprise.
You mentioned that there's always more regulation. You gave us a number of examples. It seems to be never ending. What's probably the most important wave of regulation right now that's really going to be affecting financial institutions?
There will be a lot more focus on the consumer side, given that the amount of let's say loosely regulated businesses out there, the amount of innovation that's happening in the fintech world. You're seeing offerings that were not there some time back, and what that means. It is, I'm pretty sure a lot of regulators are reflecting on it in terms of what poses a systemic risk and what does not, right? The other major areas, for example, is the asset class. As you look at, ESG is a huge trend, right? We were saying probably $450 billion of investor share last year. It only is increasing. Crypto is a mega trend. Again, now you talk about crypto in trillions, right? So it's a very important part as well. And it is probably, if you say where is regulation headed, I would say a lot of reflection on the consumer side, a lot of reflection on some of these new asset classes or trends, which are probably not adequately reflected right now. Although there is a lot of regulators focused on it, and especially Hong Kong, Singapore. You see, I think there's a lot more sort of regulators embracing that innovation and actually working with the industry in putting the right regulation in place.
We've been talking about the financial centers in the region. Is it a different story when you go into the developing markets?
I would say probably I turn the question, right? So I think that the difference was a lot more 10, 15 years back than it is these. I think the priorities are converging at a much faster pace. I think given everything is becoming digital, given the challenges around data, given that compute is quite pervasive, I think it is converging a lot faster. Now there are of course, differences in the spread of infrastructure, especially on the compute side. There is differences in regulation still across jurisdictions, and I think because Indonesia has a different priority from Singapore and has a different priority from Malaysia. I believe the global drivers are converging pretty quickly. The challenges in front of regulators are converging pretty quickly. They will still continue to reflect the local context of their jurisdiction, but I would say there's a lot more convergence than there was, for example, if you look at it 20 years back.
Okay. And does that make it easier for banks or insurance companies and so on to scale within the region?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. So I would say on the demand side, there is a lot more convergence, right? It doesn't necessarily become easier from a regulatory compliance standpoint, right? But yes, from the standpoint of we see technology rollouts across the region. We see what sort of products that they come out. I think even in terms of accounting regulations, things like that, I think there is a lot of standardization that has come in. Can a lot more standardization come in? Yes, for sure. And I think that is where I suppose it's still fairly complex. If you are a multi-jurisdictional financial institution, yeah, I mean, there's still a fairly significant economic burden to staying compliant.
What's the goal for FIS in Asia for 2022?
So look, we will continue to work with our clients. James, I think there is a lot more focus on cloud adoption, on moving towards as a service models, across trading, across banking, across insurance. There's a lot more focus on regulatory compliance, right? I think there is so that is all in play. As I said, there are a few priorities that we set up as an organization ourselves. One is, as a solution provider, number one is providing a frictionless end-to-end connections between our platforms and data, right? So we continue to move towards that overall. Then using this data to sort of expose our platform capabilities, via APIs, UIs, right? So we continue to stay focused on that. We're really looking to embed AI, ML in everything that we do. We'll continue to work with our clients across the region in terms of some of the offerings that I talked about. We'll continue to roll that out, and then keep moving beyond the traditional software to providing much more enhanced services around, whether it's regulation or if it's other technology and ops, much more enhanced services around it, right? But essentially, keep pushing on, sort of most importantly, addressing, for example, compliance needs with technology instead of people, and be able to prove that ROI, to our clients to sort of take them on that journey.
Last question, Ashish, is what would be your hope on the regulatory and compliance front in the region? What would be a good outcome from the regulators and industry in the coming year?
Well, as much standardization as possible, right? I mean, it's standardization. I suppose, look, the big mega trends, ESG, crypto, I think they need to be reflected a lot better. There needs to be a standardized taxonomy across. There needs to be standardized set of rules across. I mean, is that all like too ideal a state? I don't think so. I think the challenges are converging pretty rapidly. So yeah, I think that would probably be my wish.
Okay, great. Well, Ashish Rai, it's been a pleasure having you on DigFin VOX. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Jim. Thanks.